Among all people of culture is a common denominator, and that's a love and appreciation for both the Alien and Predator franchises. Throughout the years, these two titans have both done their own thing, but they've also come together to create some of the most memorable experiences in both film and gaming. Speaking of which, I thought it'd be worth going back and taking a look at some of those more notable entries as far back as 1993.
Run, but you can't hide.
And although the series is most well known for its first-person shooters, it actually started off with a couple of forays into the beat-em-up genre, with titles on both the Super Nintendo and in the arcades. Right, so before we get started, I've got to mention that this video is sponsored by NVIDIA and MSI. And before we get too far into things, I've got to give a quick rundown over their new beastly MSI Pulse 17 B13 VGK laptop. God, that's a mouthful. Now that sci-fi design on the outside's only a mere hint at the powerful innards within. I'm talking graphics power up to an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4070 with 8GB of GDDR6 RAM, and processor power up to an Intel Core i7 13700H. Which means the MSI Pulse 17 is built for a mix of everyday computing, but most importantly, plenty of gaming. On the GPU front, you get all the benefits of the latest NVIDIA technology. There's DLSS 3 with AI upscaling and frame generation for a serious bump to frame rates, even with ray tracing on. Plus, Max-Q technology optimizes overall system performance, including battery life, power, and even acoustics. Speaking of battery life, the MSI Pulse 17 laptop's got a built-in mux switch, so you can choose between better battery life for, everyday stuff, or tap into more graphics power when you're gaming. Is that not enough for you? Well, pop the lid and you'll notice the RGB backlit support for gamers who love a bit of an impromptu light show. So to learn more about the MSI Pulse 17, hit that link in the video description for more info. Now, the Super Nintendo game was released in early 1993 and developed by Japanese team Jorodan, whose only other notable title was a Game Boy port for Bubble Bobble. Anyway, the story in this is that in the far future, on a distant planet named Vega 4, humans have accidentally dug up a bunch of xenomorph eggs, which then eventually gestate into fully formed Xenos and take over the city of New Shanghai. As a lone predator who happens to be in the neighborhood getting up to no good, you pick up the distress signal and land on the planet, with the sole purpose of beating up as many of these things as is humanly possible. Now, in terms of the gameplay, it's pretty simple and should feel pretty familiar to people used to similar titles like Streets of Rage or Double Dragon. For every level, you move from the left to the right, along with jumping, punching, and sliding. Weapons include the Predator's wrist blade, the throwing discs, spears, plus you can also cloak and use the Predator's plasma caster, which has infinite energy. And it's far too easy to just hang back on one side of the map with this thing and spam it repeatedly, which will have that annoying high-pitched sound it makes burn into your brain.
Shut up!
Charge this up long enough and it even releases a really powerful blast that looks like a rejected spell from Golden Axe, which damages everything on the screen. It's kind of funny seeing the aliens completely ignore the Predator when he's cloaked, even though most iterations show that aliens can see right through that thing. But you will enjoy those brief moments of respite you get where you're not having to mash the attack button, because otherwise this is one horrendous and tedious game. The reason being that you're really just beating on the same couple of alien types over and over, and I mean there's nothing wrong with repetition, I mean it's the foundation for most beat 'em ups, but if that repetition is just the same couple of button inputs, well then it starts to border into tedium. The boss fights are just horrendous too, like this one that jumps in and out of water because apparently Xenos can gestate in dolphins. This thing pops out for mere nanoseconds, taking a few swipes at you, along with turning into a fucking wagon wheel and slamming into the player at high speeds. Followed by this boss, which is apparently what happens when a Xeno has a gorilla as a host. Or how about taking out endless chest bursters that fall from the sky, because yeah, that's fun, and apparently also constitutes as a boss encounter. It's actually a bit of a masterclass in how to not design end-of-level boss fights, and all of these are about as fun as trying to pull out your toenails with rusty pliers. I will admit though that slide move is hilarious, and if I had the patience to just push two buttons over and over, well yeah, I'd probably sit there for the 45 minutes it takes to beat this thing. One of the main reasons that this thing sucks is because it lacks the most important mechanic for a beat 'em up, and that's the co-op play. And yeah, for some reason, this is a one-player game, which I guess on some level does kind of make sense, considering you're playing as one of the galaxy's most solitary hunters. But just from a basic enjoyment perspective, it makes the whole thing just so boring playing by your lonesome. And you can't help but wonder what it really would have been like if you had a second player to help. Well, wonder no further, because that question got answered with Capcom's arcade classic. Simply titled Alien vs Predator, this one was an arcade exclusive released in 1994, which even supported up to 3 players at once. Able to play as either a hunter or warrior predator, Lieutenant Lin Kurosawa, or even Major Dutch himself. Yeah, making this the only game I think in the entire franchise that references the first Predator film. It even looks a little bit like Arnie. Well, as much as they could make it look like him without getting sued. Each character also has different movesets, stats, and abilities, so they don't just all feel like clones of Bimmy and Jimmy from Double Dragon. The story in this one is similar to the SNES version, with the city being overrun by aliens, only this time the Predators are working with the humans. And how we still haven't had an AVP movie that's brought back an aging Arnold Schwarzenegger to utilize this very plot point is anyone's guess. Anyway, it doesn't take too long to play this before you realize just how awesome the whole thing is, and goddamn son, this one has the same level of quality and polish that's really prevalent with most Capcom beat-em-ups from the 1990s, showing off the kind of masterful sprite work that really helped to define an entire decade. Not to mention just some of the best promo art of all time. I mean, get a load of this stuff. The Punisher arcade game is another title that also comes to mind here, showing how Capcom are really able to take an IP that wasn't even theirs to begin with, but inject it with their own flair and DNA and really make it stand out and feel unique. Not to mention, just make the whole thing a lot of fun to play through. Similarly with AVP, not only does this game just look and sound amazing, but it's also a blast to play, with a justifiably challenging difficulty mode that can somewhat be balanced out against the player's own skill level. Controls are really simple. You've got a basic melee attack, either kicking or punching or using a melee weapon, along with a ranged attack that differs for each character. Predators get access to those awesome plasma casters, Lin gets a semi-automatic pistol, and Dutch gets a machine gun built into his arm. And to balance out all of these having unlimited ammo, they'll overheat if they're used too often. Aside from that, you can also pick up the many weapons scattered around each stage, with series favourites like the pulse rifle, the smart gun, and the flamethrower. And look man, if the sight of a predator wielding a smart gun and a goddamn pulse rifle doesn't get you warm between the thighs, well, then nothing will. Simple controls are the cornerstone of any good beat 'em up, but Capcom has still found a few ways here to expand upon it just being 3 inputs. So yeah, while simply mashing the attack button will end up with a basic but effective combo, even something as basic as jumping and attacking will have different effects. If you're grappling an enemy, jumping and then pressing attack will even let you pile drive an enemy into the ground like your Zangief from Street Fighter. And press both the melee attack and ranged attack at the same time and you'll let off a really powerful special move, which again differs for each character. It's almost so fun pulling off all these moves that you start to forget how much the game is otherwise kicking your ass. Because yeah, flashy visuals and sprite work aside, this is still an arcade game at heart, and that means it won't waste time in sapping your life away faster than a gold-digging ex-girlfriend. Either way though, what Capcom managed to create here is hands down one of the best examples of the co-op coin arcade craze of the 90s. If you ever wanted to see an example of when this genre was at its absolute peak, well, damn son, look no further.
I wrote a blog post a while ago about why I f***ing hate video games, because this is what it does. It appeals to like the male fantasy.
The only crime here is that it still hasn't been ported to any other platform, something which the next game in the video also suffers from.
Introducing Alien vs Predator for the 64-bit Atari Jaguar. You might not want to play it alone.
Now, if you're one of the 12 people in the world who actually owned a Jaguar, well then you might also be one of the 3 or 4 people who owned and played AVP, a first-person shooter released for the console in 1994. The first game of 3 to be developed by Rebellion, it was a pretty ambitious title, trying to replicate that first-person formula that had started to become so popular on PC, and attempt to get it working on a console, and it is kind of impressive in that regard, considering the limitations of the Jaguar and what they were forced to work with. all set on a US CM training base, with the player able to choose from playing as either the Marine, the Predator, or an alien. And while the map itself is the same across each character, the weapons and the gameplay is entirely different. The Marine starts off near the stasis pods, the Predator starts off in his ship, and the aliens start off in the hive. Now, the Marine campaign is all about firepower. You've got weapons like the shotgun, the smart gun, and if you last longer than I did, the smart gun and the flamethrower.
Bug soup.
Every second door you come across is locked, so you're constantly on the hunt for higher level security cards, which may as well be invisible, because they're often tucked inside the corpses of long since killed personnel. Predator, on the other hand, is all about honor, putting those iconic weapons to use like the wrist blade and the plasma caster, combining his cloak and different vision modes to hunt down Marines and aliens alike. To unlock the better weapons though, you've got to earn enough honor in the first place, which has to be done by killing something when you're not cloaked, and that becomes this very tedious process of cloaking, uncloaking, killing something, and then cloaking again. And this is necessary because only the plasma caster can actually damage the alien queen. So you pretty much just need to grind out kills here, unlocking the spear and then the disc before eventually getting that plasma caster. And then the alien is probably the most bizarre one of all, because without the means to heal itself, you're instead forced into constantly cocooning Marines to essentially create what's more or less respawn points. And this might kind of sound like a neat idea, but there's so many Marines around and you take damage so quickly that you'll spend more time cocooning people and waiting around for those stupid things to gestate than you will actually, exploring the level. Still though, you can see the creativity and ingenuity here for the gameplay, and for a console FPS, it does look pretty good, mostly. Even if those Predator vision modes look like what would happen if someone vomited up LSD. You also can't deny that the game has got a great atmosphere, foregoing that overbearing soundtrack and instead using ambient noise to really heighten the mood. When you're playing as a Marine and a Predator is nearby, you can even hear it making those iconic clicking noises, which, as a small kid, I'm sure is the stuff of nightmares. However, it's also come a bit of a relic by today's standards, and it doesn't even really stack up all that well against other games from the same era. The problem is that the level design is literally maze-like. That is to say, you are exploring literal mazes. Take one look at the maps for each floor and you'll see what I mean. It's a mess. It's just like a bunch of random shapes compiled together without any kind of proper structure or flow. You gotta keep in mind that Doom came out a year prior on the PC, and by that point the entire genre had really started to evolve past this approach to level design. And it is easy to compare this thing to Doom, which a lot of people did back then, but it really does share much more in common with Wolfenstein 3D. Mostly with its singular flat levels, flat lighting, and simplistic sprite work, which was already becoming a thing of the past, even at that point, replaced with games like obviously Doom, Dark Forces, and System Shock. Those kind of games were able to replicate more realistic looking locations. In Doom's case, for instance, it was nuclear plants, toxin refineries, labs, and computer stations. That's why if someone goes off and plays Doom now, even for the first time, they're still likely to get far less lost and confused compared to if they went off and played something like Wolfenstein 3D. Because the levels in Doom and those latter games had distinct layouts and notable rooms that made it much more easy to get your bearings. These environments in AVP though are just the same looking wall textures copied over and over. You might get the occasional sign on the wall which tells you which part of the floor you're on, or that you're near an airlock or an elevator, but that's about it. Once you go into that ventilation system, it becomes even more confusing, and the layout for these areas just makes no sense whatsoever. This is the main way to get around the base as the alien, and also kind of essential for the Marine to get past some locked doors, and this is just a complete jumble of random twists and turns, ending in dead ends and often unintentionally having you ending up right back where you started. And what sort of lunatic designed event system that's going to curve around in an L shape and come to a dead end? Who is the architect? Ivo Shandor? Ouch! Maybe supposed to be a reference to the second film when Newt is trying to lead Ripley and the other characters to the vents and they kind of get lost because it's all so confusing. Nah, they just fucked up.
Which way? Straight ahead and left.
What I find even more annoying is how often corridors are only wide enough for one person, which makes it really easy to get trapped in and stuck because you literally can't get around enemies. And off the back of that, what's even more annoying is when you kill aliens as the Predator or the Marine, because when you kill one of these things, they leave behind an acid puddle which just never goes away, and becomes this eternal hazard that burns your feet every time you're forced to walk over it. Bullshit! I mean, I haven't seen this many burned feet since a Tony Robbins retreat. It's kind of sad that this game was the so-called killer app for the Jaguar, and playing through it now in 2023, all it really does is kill any chance you'll ever have of enjoying yourself. A big part of why this thing got so well received was that there just really wasn't anything else to compare it to, especially at the time, and especially not on a home console. But in the grand scheme of things, time has really not been kind to it either, and there's a reason why people don't talk about it as much as they do other titles like Doom, Quake, or, Duke Nukem 3D. Still though, it built the foundation for what Rebellion would work on a mere 5 years later with Alien vs Predator on the PC in 1999. And when this thing launched in 1999, you can see that in a lot of ways it's really just a massively improved version of that same game they released on the Jaguar half a decade ago. Developed exclusively from Microsoft Windows, again you're getting 3 campaigns for the price of 1 here, the Alien, Predator and Marine, and each of these again offer up a vastly different experience. As the Alien, you'll be moving around at blisteringly fast speeds, climbing up walls and attacking your prey with startling ferocity. Your claws and tail are your only weapons, but that's hardly a disadvantage, because most NPCs can be ripped apart in a matter of hits. If you aim at someone's head with the mouse, you can dish out that devastating headshot using the alien's inner mouth, which is something that still severely unnerves me, ever since I saw Yaphet Kotto catch one of those things in the first Alien film. And yeah, you'll get used to that crunchy sound effect as you frequently turn someone's brains into a snack, because this is also the main way to refill your health. Which also means saying bye-bye to that awful cocooning mechanic and hello to frequent distressing head trauma. The only downside is that you're not the most resilient creature, and it doesn't take all that much damage before you become one seriously dead bug. When you're playing as the Alien, there's 2 things you're gonna get real familiar with, and that's automated gun turrets and fire. Seems every second enemy has a Molotov cocktail or a flamethrower, and all it takes is like a whiff of petrol to set you alight, during which about all you can do is just run around screeching until it goes out. And those gun turrets are the absolute bane of the Xenomorph's existence, with these things guarding seemingly every second corridor, though I can't deny that it's definitely on brand. There's some pretty cool references in this campaign too, like one of the environments looks a lot like the Nostromo from Alien, and one of the last missions is set on Gateway Station, which is where Ripley wakes up at the start of Aliens. The final boss for this campaign is against a couple of predators, which is pretty easy. You just strafe around these guys like a total sweatlord while spamming melee attacks, and overall it's easily the shortest campaign out of all 3, taking maybe an hour or so to finish. But it's the Predator and the Marine campaigns though where you'll find the most meat, no pun intended.
Wake up, Private, you're in some serious shit.
Now the Predator campaign is just an outright power fantasy, letting you play as this technological savvy hunter, bullying Marines and punching down on Xenos like it's going out of fashion. The main goal for this campaign is initially just to rescue one of your buddies who's been kidnapped and experimented on by Weyland-Yutani, but then after that you're just trying to wipe out the remaining humans and destroy their secret weapon, which just happens to be cybernetic xenomorphs. And look, that is just so fucking dumb that it's actually awesome. This campaign is also packed with fan service and nods to both franchises. One point you return to the smelting plant on Fury 161, which is the same planet from Alien 3, and it all ends with a fight against the Alien Queen, where you show this prehistoric bitch how we do things downtown. For weapons, the Predator's got his wrist blades along with the spear gun, which first got introduced in Predator 2. Then of course that iconic shoulder cannon, the plasma pistol, and then the throwing disc. As well as being able to heal himself at any time, and unlike the healing in the first game, which was a complete non-event, now when you heal, the Predator full-on jabs himself up, along with screaming out loud like he's passing the galaxy's biggest kidney stone.
Sound. It is horrible.
Plus there's probably his most important ability, the cloaking device and the vision modes.
What the hell is going on out there?
And And yeah, again, just like in the movies, the Predator can turn invisible at any time and become harder to spot, though this does seem to be dependent on what weapon you've got equipped. Along with the plasma caster, the pistol, and the disc, cloaking uses up your energy, and to stock back up, you need to grab these energy pickups, which I guess the Marines were just nice enough to keep lying around. And considering the reliance you're going to be having on the cloak and the vision modes, you're going to be mostly seeing the world here in two kinds of shade, either in blue or red. Blue for when your heat mode is activated and you're going up against the Marines, as that heat mode makes them stick out more than nipples at a wet t-shirt contest. And then red when you're going up against the aliens, as using this mode makes those aliens easier to spot than piss stains on denim jeans.
I had an accident.
You had an accident? What does that mean?
To be honest though, you'll probably want to have either of those modes on at all times anyway, only to circumvent the amount of flickering lights in the levels, which is so bad at times that it pretty much induces epilepsy.
Alright.
This is definitely the most fun campaign to play through though, and even now, over 2 decades later, there's still something undeniably enjoyable about running right up to someone and stabbing them in the face with a wrist blade. You can even collect the heads of fallen enemies as a trophy, which has no real purpose, outside of just making you feel like a bit of a badass as the Predator lets off that triumphant war cry. I really don't ever get sick of blowing Marines apart with that shoulder cannon either. That classic lock-on sound, combined with that targeting reticle, is truly one of the most memorable combinations in all of science fiction, aside from maybe Jedis and lightsabers. Finally, we've got the Marine campaign, which again takes a massive shift in tone, feeling more or less like an action horror game, primarily having the player fight back against waves and waves of Xenos which come rushing at you from all directions. It's a bug hunt.
A xenomorph. It's a bug hunt.
Given your orders by another soldier via intercom, who is very clearly a member of the dev team. In fact, it seems most of the video calls feature some really bad acting by people who clearly work for Rebellion, but you know what, if anything, that just kind of adds to the charm.
Are you guys hearing this? Are you hearing this?
Again, you'll explore some very familiar looking environments. I mean, during the very first level, you come across a space jockey inside a bone ship, and then later on, there's a very Hadley's Hope looking environment you navigate through as well. Plus, it seamlessly combines two franchises, putting you into combat with both aliens and other predators, like this one here who kinda looked like he was in the middle of taking a shit. As you'd expect, the Marine comes with all the tools of the trade, most importantly the pulse rifle, the smart gun, and the flamethrower. And in the last 30 seconds of the last level, the minigun. The way they tried to integrate the smart gun's lock-on mode here is also masterfully executed, and it works without feeling like it's putting the game into easy mode, still requiring some basic game sense and awareness from the player. And even those bigger weapons, like the rocket launcher, make a worthwhile addition to any self-respecting Marine's arsenal. You light the way with your night vision mode and flares, and incoming threats are picked up on your motion detector, giving off that trademark beep, which increases in pitch as something closes in on your position.
12 meters. 11. 10.
And it all just feels like a massive love letter to the films.
Let's rock!
The first level gives you a bit of time to get acclimatized to how movement feels, along with the basics of interacting with the environment, but then after that it becomes absolutely relentless, and rarely do you get a moment to even catch your breath, because almost every mission as the Marine has you going around flipping switches and turning valves, but throughout all of this you're being constantly attacked by the Xenos, and it's kinda like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while someone's throwing a bunch of rocks at your face. The music reflects this as well, and mere seconds after loading in, you get these really loud and thumping soundtracks that just keep going until you finally make it to the end. The third mission in this campaign is the reason why I could never beat this game as a kid until that gold edition came out. Yeah, you see, some people might remember that there were originally 2 versions of the game, the first one back in 1999 and then the gold edition in 2000. And it wasn't until that gold edition that they added in manual save points. I mean, just try to consider that in the original you had to beat entire missions in one go. And that's a pretty tall order, man, considering the length of some of these and the placement of things like face huggers in dark corners. So overall, it's definitely the hardest campaign out of all 3. But really what you'd expect and hope for when you're playing as the character that's really the lowest down on the food chain. The final boss for this campaign is against the Alien Queen, which is a direct homage to the final scene from Aliens, where you need to blow the goddamn thing out of the airlock. You can even hide in the nearby vents to avoid it like Newt did. So yeah, it's a fun and terrifying campaign. And although you could probably pick all three of these campaigns to pieces if you really want to, I think overall they're a great example of something being a sum of its parts. Because I just can't think of any other game we got from back then, FPS especially, that gave you three vastly different experiences to play through. And the relatively short length for all of them is actually to their benefit, encouraging replays and trying to get through each mission as cleanly as possible. I still remember how scared I got playing through that Marine campaign as a 13-year-old, which directly contrasted with how I felt when I was playing as the Predator, and then the sick glee that I got from decapitating defenseless Weyland-Yutani employees as the Alien. Its legacy lives on in the insanely fun multiplayer mode with both co-op and deathmatch maps, which are still really accessible and hilarious to play through with friends. Oh, that's a one-hit kill, baby! The fact that online servers for countless AAA games have somehow been taken down throughout the years, but then the fact you can easily get a match going with an even older game like this really shows how much the industry has declined since 1999.
Yeah, nice shot.
If Half-Life hadn't have come out around the same time period and stolen all of the limelight, well, we'd probably hear people talking about this one way more than we currently do. Still though, that cult status is well deserved, and people with the patience to install it and check it out, you won't be disappointed. Right, so at this point the series left the hands of Rebellion and found its way to the crazy uncle of FPS developers with Monolith Productions, with what a lot of people believe to be the best game in the franchise, and in some ways, they wouldn't be wrong. AVP 2 was released in 2001, again exclusively from Microsoft Windows, running on the Lithtech engine, previously used in such titles as No One Lives Forever, Blood 2, and Shogo Mobile Armored Division. And yeah, you guessed it, again having three campaigns, playing as the Alien, Marine, and Predator. Instead of it just being three separate storylines though, now all three characters are more or less connected, moving to the same locations and at key points even crossing paths directly, with it mostly being set around a Weyland-Yutani research station on the planet of LV-1201.
Man, my luck never changes.
It's got that whole Half-Life opposing force vibe going on, and it definitely helps in making it feel like you're taking part in this larger overarching storyline. Each campaign has its own main antagonist as well. For the Alien, it's a guy named Eisenberg, not to be confused with Heisenberg, and this guy is responsible for all the research getting carried out on the Xenos. For the Predator, it's General Rykov, a soldier who had a run-in with the Predator decades earlier, and then for the Marine, it's kinda like a combination of both, as they deal with the corruption inherent at Weyland-Yutani. And in a lot of ways outside of the story, AVP 2 is really just an objective improvement across the board. I mean, for starters, it looks a hell of a lot better and has proper cinematics, with dialogue and key characters given their own motivations and agendas, some of which are actually kind of interesting to sit through, even if they are a bit wooden and everyone looks like mannequins with working eyelids.
We should move inside.
This time during the Alien campaign, you get to experience an entire life cycle, starting off as a facehugger brought to the planet for research purposes, and then in a gross display of worker incompetence, it gets released from the egg. Yeah, put that one on Fail Army. As a facehugger out to make it in the big bad world, you're then sneaking through vents and hiding in the shadows, avoiding nearby humans until you find some poor solitary asshole just trying to get in a bit of shut-eye who ends up becoming the perfect host. The second chapter begins with you literally chomping your way out of this guy's chest in real time, which is still one of the most metal sequences of all time. Then after that, you evolve into the drone form we all know and hate, and have to make your way back to the hive to save the Queen. God save the Queen. Oh wait, I can't say that anymore.
Squad 4, report please.
Thankfully, because Xenos haven't learned how to handle pulse rifles just yet, your main method of attack is still the claws and the tail combo. The movement speed's also been significantly reduced since the first game, which is one of the many ways here it feels like it's been balanced around the multiplayer mode, but in lieu of this, you've now got like a jump attack, which has the added benefit of instantly jibbing anything you come into contact with. It's again the shortest campaign out of all three, coming in at maybe like 90 minutes or so, but it's a campaign that pretty much just never lets up. And it's a sickeningly fun power fantasy running around ambushing soldiers and bullying innocent scientists, giving it to kill a few predators along the way. Awesome. Now, the Marine campaign ain't just the best Marine campaign in the series, it's probably one of the best horror-based FPS campaigns of all time, and the pacing throughout the first couple of missions alone is just masterful, not even introducing any enemies for about 20 or so minutes. You're playing as Corporal Frosty Harrison, serving aboard the USS Verloc, and you're sent to the planet to investigate the research colony and find out why it's had its communications knocked out. Yeah, sounds familiar.
All we know is that there's still no contact with the colony, and that a xenomorph may be involved.
I don't like this one bit.
This is definitely the most narrative and story-driven campaign out of all three, with quite a bit of time here spent getting us familiar with Harrison's buddies, Jones, Duke, Sergeant Hall, Major Kane, and Pilot Johnson, voiced by Jen Taylor.
Not much to work with, sir.
Who is doing the absolute worst Cockney accent I think I've ever heard in my life, to the point that I've got to assume she's doing this as some kind of practical joke.
What'll it take to get airborne?
A landing beacon and wind shear data for a start. Plus the ship's a little beat up. Stabilizer's jammed. I can fix it, but it'll take me an hour or so. The antenna's fine.
She also voices Tomiko, a scientist who aids Harrison along the way and helps him escape the planet.
You'd better.
But you're still very much on your own for most of the time here, and after crashing in that dropship, you're separated from the rest of the squad when a roof caves in, at which point the Marines almost instantly assume that Harrison is dead, like at an alarming rate.
What about Harrison?
We have to assume he won't make it.
It then soon becomes obvious that you're getting hunted by a predator, seeing the remains of its gruesome work and observing far too many random explosions and odd occurrences for it to just be coincidence. I mean, that is to say, I don't think trucks usually roll down hills and explode like that. After this, you're then tasked with getting a beacon online so the rest of the Marines can land safely, which involves navigating through some very dark and claustrophobic environments, with a really cheeky jump scare where the level designer knew exactly what he was doing.
Major, looks like the generator has been reset.
Then you reunite with your squad, but only for like a brief moment, because now you're sent off to an entirely new area to reactivate the security grid, which involves moving through more pitch black environments and coming across the signs that you've missed one hell of a fight. Then it's at this point, finally, when you're attacked by the Xenos, and yeah man, talk about going from the frying pan and right into the fire. Because you go from moving through these completely innocuous environments to having to move through a vent system and getting ambushed from all sides.
Falling back in good order, sir. It's really haunted.
Prep for liftoff. Harrison, you've got 2 minutes.
What comes next is the best mission in the game, where you have to head into an alien hive all alone to rescue Sergeant Hall. And this whole area is still incredibly unsettling to play through. You might notice too that as soon as you enter, the background music cuts out completely, leaving you with just the soft buzzing and beeping of your motion tracker. When you finally find Hall, she's in the kind of condition you'd expect her to be in, and about all you can do at that point is mercy kill her and then haul ass, running backwards like you're playing Serious Sam and hightailing it to the APC with every Xeno in the near vicinity trying to stop you. And this is just the first half hour of the campaign. Later on, it switches up gears again, slowing down a bit as it deals with the corruption at Weyland-Yutani before you've got a finale inside the alien hive. So yeah, overall it's a lot different to the last game, which really just had you running around frantically pretty much the entire time with barely any moments to even catch your breath. What I really like too is how they've added in those tools of the trade that we first saw in Aliens, a lot of which were missing from the 1999 game, like the welding torch and the bypass tool. The shoulder lamp's also been introduced and flares are no longer infinite. You do, however, get absolutely inundated with weapons in this one. Obviously, you've got those returning champions like the pulse rifle, the smart gun, flamethrower, and the minigun, both of which are just amazing, by the way. But they even find a way to throw in more weapons, like one of the best shotguns of all time, a grenade launcher, a rocket launcher, and even a sniper rifle. It is almost like too many weapons though, and some of these are definitely designed with the multiplayer mode in mind. The other thing is that some of the weapons kind of cancel each other out. I mean, the flamethrower looks and sounds great and is really effective, but then again, so is the pulse rifle, the smart gun, and the shotgun. The grenade launcher might have like 5 different ammo types, but you don't ever really need to use them anyway. And I would have used the minigun more if I actually could, but once again, you only get it within the last 10 minutes of the campaign. I know it's kind of a weird complaint to make here that there's too many guns and that they're so good to use, but something that Monolith Productions are really masters at And go and look at the amount of weapons they crammed into Blood 2, Shogo, and No One Lives Forever, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Combat is still fast and terrifying though, and Xenos come at you with even more startling speed than the first game. One of the coolest things here is how you can see their acid blood spray off in different directions when you shoot them. And what I thought was even more awesome was how if you shoot an alien's legs off, you'll see them crawl along the ground using their arms. It's just a really enjoyable and hardcore shooter, and the campaign is again ridiculously intense at times. It's kind of amazing, man, how something this old can still serve its purpose in scaring the absolute piss out of you. You know, as in, piss is gonna leave your body. Not to mention, it's also got some hilarious physics back from the good old days when you could be killed in an FPS game by simply standing near a closing door. And then finally we've got the Predator campaign, which to be honest kind of sits somewhere at the bottom for me. And the simple explanation for why I don't like this one as much anymore is that it just isn't as much of a power fantasy now. This campaign really tries to tell a story here about how the Predator you're playing as, formerly known as Prince, no, that's actually his title, is pursuing an old adversary who just happens to be General Rykov. Prince is on the planet also responding to the distress signal, and he soon learns that Rykov is alive. But that's not the issue. The issue is in the way that the game doles out your weapons and the pacing of each chapter. Now in the first game you more or less had the entire arsenal from the get-go, but in AVP 2 though, they give them out to you much more slowly. The first level is more or less like a tutorial, moving across the planet killing enemy soldiers with your wrist blades, spear, spear gun, and discs, because that's all you've got available by that point. Along with introducing a new high jump move that lets you navigate those polygonal treetops just that little bit faster. You'll notice early on though how the hitboxes are kinda wonky when using the melee weapons, as it seems attacks often pass through enemies entirely, so as a result I just spent most of these opening levels just running past everything altogether. Even when you do engage in combat though, it's primarily going to be with the spear or the spear gun, the latter of which you don't even get extra ammo for. And look, don't get me wrong, I like nailing someone's limbs to the wall with a spear gun as much as the next man does, but I'm really only getting into this for that plasma caster. And the fact that they don't give you this thing until the 5th chapter of the campaign, of which there's only 7 by the way, means that for more than half of the story you're missing out on what's arguably the Predator's most iconic weapon. And then even once you get it, you realise it disables your cloak every time you fire it, which again, I have to imagine has been done to balance out the multiplayer. Because it sure as hell didn't break the Predator's cloak in any of the movies, that's for damn sure. It just didn't break its cloak at any time. Anytime. It's most useful at dealing with the waves and waves of Xenos you've got to contend with for the last few chapters of the campaign, as it kills these guys in a single hit. And you'll again spend so much time in infrared mode that it's like you're seeing the world through Satan's butthole. It's just kind of a shame you can't stalk clueless commandos from the treetops with this thing like a silent, unseen assassin. Which, you know, is how it really should have been. New weapons include the net gun and the remote explosives, which are cool, but again like the spear gun, there's not ever any ammo refills for either of these. So once you get them, that's all the ammo you're gonna get for the remainder of the campaign. Bitch. They also somehow found a way to ruin that pistol, because now this thing does splash damage, which makes it pretty much useless against the Xenos, mostly because those things run right up to you with no regard for self-preservation. Healing ain't that much of an issue though, because again, you can jab yourself up like Rent Boy from Trainspotting at any time here. And you've got an energy sifting device now that instantly refills your energy bar, but I mean, even that has its own dilemma. Because if you have to heal, chances are you don't have enough energy to do so, right? So this becomes a really tiresome combination of recharging your energy, healing, then recharging your energy again. It's like they tried to make a more tactical campaign here and have you moving slower and thinking smarter, which, you know, does fall in line with the Predator being this super advanced space hunter, but in the process, they've kind of lost that power play element that the character had in the last game.
I will keep this as a trophy.
The fuck you are.
The final 2 bosses are the Alien Queen and then Rykov, who's running around in an exosuit, and the fight against the Queen ain't much more than just circle strafing and spamming attacks. And then the fight against Rykov is just about exploiting this guy around corners and shooting the hitboxes of his giant exosuit when it comes into view. So yeah, I mean, this one still has merit, but overall it's really the weakest campaign out of all three, and it really shouldn't have been. Still though, all of this is a masterpiece when compared to that abysmal expansion pack they released later on with Primal Hunt. And what can I say here about Primal Hunt that won't make it sound like I'm describing an explosion at a sewage plant? As a prequel to AVP 2, you're playing as either a PMC soldier working for Weyland-Yutani, another Predator who admittedly does look pretty badass, and then finally a Pred Alien. And it might have served as a good side dish to the main game, but this thing is just rife with really crappy level design, unbalanced difficulty spikes, not to mention boring cinematics. And it just makes for a very unpolished and unenjoyable experience. Let's just say that when people look back at AVP 2, it's not to fondly remember this expansion pack. What they're going to remember is that campaign, man, not to mention its multiplayer mode, which was arguably as popular, if not more so, than the campaign. And even to this day, there's still active servers going, though most of them seem to be about as empty as a Ray William Johnson fan meetup. AVP 2's licensing and copyright is one of the most notorious ones in the history of gaming, especially when it comes to first-person shooters. And the fact we haven't had some kind of remaster or revival for this thing over the years is just downright criminal. But problems aside, it's still got some of the best horror-based FPS campaigns of all time, and its charms are still there over 2 decades later.
Pair off and search by twos. I want this guy found fast.
Where they went from here, though, is where it starts to get a bit interesting with the next game in the list, Aliens vs Predator Extinction, making it the only game in this video outside of that one on the SNES and the Jaguar to get a console-only release.
Alien vs Predator Extinction.
Now, Extinction is interesting for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it's an RTS, the only one of its kind in the entire AVP library, and secondly, because it's an RTS on a console. And the fact they've been able to condense all the inputs and commands you'd expect from that genre onto the limitations of a controller is pretty damn impressive. Out of all the game genres, there's always been something about RTS though that I've struggled with, even as far back as older titles like Age of Empires. I think the part of your brain that's supposed to make understanding these games possible just got left out when my parents conceived me, and I've always sucked at getting good with these, but yet this is something I didn't suffer so much from with Extinction, and in fact I was kind of amazed at how easily I picked the whole thing up here. You can easily select multiple units at once by just holding down a single button as a circle grows in size. You can bind squads to the directional pad, you can change the behavior of individual units, and navigate the screen with the left thumbstick or quickly dart across the minimap with the right one. And it's really kind of clever how someone has managed to get all of this stuff working on what's more or less a handicap of a platform, especially for this kind of genre. This one is set on the Weyland-Yutani colonized planet of LV-742. Oh yeah, and by the by, the LV stands for Life Viable, so it's safe to assume off the back of that there's at least 741 other planets aside from this one.
Boring!
Anyway, LV-742 has come into contact with the Xenomorphs, big surprise, and instead of taking off and nuking the site from orbit, the company's instead decided to stay and make lemonade out of those acid-spitting lemons. This of course draws the attention of the Predators, who really at this point are just going from planet to planet, collecting skull trophies like they're Pogs. Remember Pogs? Now this story won't exactly grab you by the balls and hold them in a vice-like grip, but it does have something else which is probably its best attribute, and that's its 6th generation charm. Yeah, that's right man, this is a PS2 and Xbox era title, and there's just something about this period of video games that is still absolutely timeless.
Create the eggs and find the hosts to build up the horde. Then, search far and wide for predator hosts. The hive must grow stronger.
And all the ray tracing, motion capture, and cinematic voice acting of modern games just can't compare to the good old-fashioned chunky charm of early to mid-2000s graphics.
You're goddamn right.
Now each mission more or less starts off the same, with the player being dropped into a relatively safe pocket of the map, then tasked with going off and completing your objectives, whatever they might be, along with finding resources and crafting more units along the way. The Marine campaign is again all about heavy firepower, with pulse rifle, smart gun, flamethrower, and sniper units. Resources are required by repairing atmospheric processes, yeah, the very same thing that took up a sizable chunk of land on LV-426.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
And those reinforcements and new units are called into the battlefield on UCM dropships. These can only be called in by a Comtech soldier, and I don't know if that's supposed to be a reference to the TechCom soldiers from the Terminator movies, but either way, if you've got none of these guys left, it's game over, man. Game over.
Shit.
You can have a total of 25 units all up, and it pays to have a good variety of these guys as well, because even those less combat-focused troops like the synthetics are often needed to complete mission objectives, as these guys are the only ones who can haul around these crucial items. Predators, on the other hand, are again all about honor, and these guys hunt in smaller packs, only up to 12 units at a time, and spawn in on the battlefield in drop pods. A big component of this campaign is collecting trophies, be it either human or alien, so after every little skirmish you send all your boys out like head-hunting ants to collect all those shiny skulls off nearby corpses. And those new units are called in via the Predator Shrine, which is not only mobile but can also fire back at attacking enemies, which is kind of funny to watch because it looks like this slowly moving armchair that fires out lasers. There's a whole bunch of different units here as well, like hunters with the shoulder cannons, brawlers with the wrist blades, through to the bigger and badder units like the Vanguards, who are predators covered in body armor wielding plasma scythes, which is just so fucking awesome. I can't find fault in that if I tried. And of course, all these guys can either heal or cloak themselves at any time. This is definitely the most enjoyable campaign here, and some of those missions where you're fighting back against rival Predator clans are dorky as hell, but in all the right way. Finally, the aliens are what you'd expect with the whole egg, facehugger, and chestburster life cycle, and creating units for this campaign is easily the slowest process of all. So for starters, you'll need a queen to lay eggs, and the only way to get a queen is to hatch a Praetorian from a Praetorian egg, and then evolve it into a queen. After that, when the egg hatches, you send off your little facehugger to do its business, then sit around waiting while that chestburster gestates, and eventually bursts out of, well, something's chest. Before then waiting again while that thing cocoons and evolves into one of the various Xeno units. And this has to be done for every single unit. 45 of them all up if you want to max out the squad. As an alternative, you can get drones to drag back the bodies of unconscious hosts, which is pretty funny to watch. Seeing some Xeno clumsily drag something back to the hive like they're moving a bag of dirty laundry. Eventually you get upgrades so the queen lays eggs, which contain 2 or even 3 facehuggers, and then facehuggers can also be upgraded so you can get 2 units from a single host. But it's just such a much slower process than simply calling in more units from the sky, and this campaign is definitely not designed for people with ADHD. Either way though, depending on who you're playing as, creating and controlling all these units is mostly pretty simple and fun. But then after like a couple of missions, you start to notice just how insanely hard this game starts to get. Now, like I said before, I'm not the best at RTS. In fact, it's a genre I avoid like genital warts. But I'd still like to think that I've got a basic understanding of what I need to do here. Even still though, there'd be missions where I'd just get absolutely wiped in a matter of seconds from this previously unseen platoon of enemies that just happened to be concealed outside of my field of vision. Some of the missions are really also just bad in concept alone. Like there's one for the Alien campaign where you're held captive inside a test lab and have to build your own army up before these hostile clone Xenos are able to do the same. You pretty much just have to race across the map and get all your facehuggers turned into drones before they do, and it's just not very fun to play through. There's also one for the Predator where you've got to sneak into a marine base to assassinate an officer, and this is really just navigating this literal maze and killing marines until your cloak runs out before then hiding until your energy recharges. And yet for some reason too, none of these enemies seem to react to getting shot at, and I can't tell if that's supposed to be a blessing or a curse.
Come on, you schnorrers! Do something!
But by far the worst thing are the missions where you've got to kill a set amount of enemy units, because these guys can often be anywhere on the map, and because the map is so vast, you'll spend 15 minutes wandering around a ghost town trying to find those last couple of enemies that you have to kill. What also ain't helping either is the often atrocious pathfinding. I've lost count the amount of times I've sent a bunch of units to a set point, and then for some reason, half of them have just run off in the opposite direction like they know something the rest of us don't. You'll get a notification that you're in battle again, which is because 4 or 5 stragglers have decided to take the scenic route and go off on their own to God knows where. So you can definitely see the kinks in the armor here, and it all does start to make sense why this thing got such average review scores. A lot of these older games, especially from the 6th generation, often felt like they were made so challenging on purpose to try to maybe extend the lifespan and the time you'd spend with them, but there is a fine line between a game being suitably challenging and then just being a bit of an asshole. Probably just need a bit more time in that development oven before it burst out of someone's chest cavity, but as living proof that the RTS genre can indeed work on a console, it's definitely got merit.
Alien vs. Predator Extinction.
Now, outside of a crappy PSP game, Rebellion would come back for one last swipe at the franchise with Aliens vs. Predator in 2010. More or less, again rebooting the series from scratch and being the only game to ever get released for the 7th generation of consoles.
Fuck you!
Yes, you've got 3 campaigns to play through with the Marine, Predator, and the Alien. Only this time, these campaigns flat out recycle the exact same environments and locations. In AVP 2, it felt like you were seeing a lot of similar looking areas, and while there was a bit of overlap here and there, mostly just to tie things together, this one's really taken like a different route and more or less just copy-pasted entire levels.
They're the same picture.
The story is set on the planet BG-386, where Weyland-Yutani has planted a flag, investigating an ancient pyramid with ties to both the Xenomorphs and the Predator's history. Compared again to AVP 2 though, where each character really had their own antagonist and separate thing going on, the story now just feels more or less like a Predator and Alien story, with the Marine just being along for the ride. With it all mostly being centered around Weyland, voiced by Lance Henriksen this time, trying to open this pyramid like his entire future depends on it. Safe to say though that opening this thing does not end well, and about the only way that things could have gone more tits up is if Pinhead and his band of Cenobites also showed up at the same time too.
The box. You opened it. We came.
Now look, I'll admit, this is something I've always found really boring, and that's when a franchise tries to over-explain the backstory and the reasons behind why everything is the way that it is, which ultimately just makes the whole thing less interesting.
He ain't lying.
Part of the reason why the future wars in the Terminator movies were so awesome, because you only got these brief glimpses into that nightmarish future that humanity might potentially end up suffering from. I mean, you sure as shit don't need 3 fucking movies explaining every little detail of how everything comes to pass. And it's for that same reason why I don't really give 2 shits about the history behind the Aliens and the Predators, and both of them having this millennia-old feud wasn't something that ever needed to be explained. I mean, look man, Predators like to hunt shit, and Aliens and humans make good hunting. That's all it ever needed to be. I mean, all I really play these games for anyway is to have the bejesus scared out of me during the Marine campaign, and at least on that front, this one again does deliver. Because this might not be the best Marine campaign in the series, but it sure as hell is one of the best looking ones. And even over a decade later, this is a really good looking game at times, with DirectX 11 effects like tessellation and other lighting tricks that still look amazing. It's a great example of a bygone era, especially for FPS games, where level designers really seem to put a lot of effort and thought into how lighting can affect the mood of a scene. Just kind of seemed that after Doom 3, every game engine that had some kind of dynamic lighting system went on to have environments like this, which was a good thing. And you'll see this firsthand here with a lot of these really impressive and truly handcrafted feeling environments, where the lighting does a fantastic job of heightening the tension and that eerie nature of the backdrop. The modeling for the Predators and the Aliens looks great, and the usage of bump mapping in some of those alien environments just looks incredible too. It's just really just an amazing looking game, and the artistry prevalent throughout some of those last few levels inside the pyramid and those ruined structures is beaming with creativity. Plus it's also an incredibly violent game.
Yes! That's awesome!
Now I remember back when this thing came out, there was a lot of hubbub over it getting released in Australia due to the whole R18 rating and all that crap. Thankfully though, the decision to release it was made by people who actually know what the fuck they're talking about, and not a bunch of crusty old boomers, so the game eventually saw the light of day.
That's a bloody outrage, it is!
Which means we got to appreciate truly some of the most gratuitous executions in all of gaming, with the Predator and the Alien campaign. It's almost like both these species are playing with their food, the way they seem to savor the moments before and after killing someone, and there's definitely something undeniably fun here about controlling such vicious creatures. Now, the Marine campaign has you playing as the so-called rookie, crashing on the planet and being separated from the rest of your squad, to then meet up with a fellow Marine named Corporal Tequila to uncover what Weyland-Yutani are up to inside this mysterious pyramid.
Come on in and grab yourself a pulse rifle, kid.
This involves running around in darkened environments, getting ambushed by Xenos who pop out of the goddamn walls, along with fighting back against combat synthetics who look like edgy Call of Duty skins. This campaign also has a whole lot of memorable sequences. I mean, the opening level alone has a really neat sequence where you've got to stand your ground inside an infested nightclub with a techno backing track heightening the mood. Then being pushed back by an ambush and captured by Xenos and hauled away.
Gotcha, bitch!
You'll fight a Predator one-on-one and even have to stand off against Weyland's synthetic doppelganger. And overall, it's a pretty decent campaign, though I do think they did the pulse rifle a bit dirty here, and I can't help but think that it feels a little bit underpowered. As a result, you'll probably mostly use the shotgun and that scoped rifle, both of which, on the flip side, are laughably overpowered. There's just no reason to not have both of these equipped the entire time you're playing this. I mean, the rifle alone kills most Xenos in a single headshot, along with absolutely shredding through those combat synthetics. The shotgun reminds me a whole lot of the shotgun from Alien Resurrection, even down to the reload time and its double barrel design, and this thing makes some of the boss fights a total breeze. That's actually not the worst comparison to make here to Alien Resurrection, considering that this can almost kind of feel like survival horror at times, with you only ever having 3 healing stims and the difficulty being really crushing on those higher modes. Killing aliens at close range really reminds you how volatile a face full of acid blood can be, and the splash damage in this campaign is fucking ludicrous. To the point that it almost leads me to believe that it might be broken. I mean, even simply shooting a corpse and standing in its near vicinity can outright kill you in nanoseconds. My real main complaint about this campaign though is the way they handle the pulse rifle and the smart gun, both of which just feel and sound like shit. I mean, there's just something so underwhelming about both of these, and for the smart gun, it's only really useful when shooting at something at close to medium range, which definitely contrasts with how effective it was in the previous games. So I think overall I'd probably rank this one somewhere in between the first and the second AVP game.
Fantastic timing, Private.
For the Predator campaign, you're playing as a Predator called Dark, coming to the planet for the thrill of the hunt, like a millennial messaging cougars on Tinder, but also to protect its heritage and lineage from these invading humans. And this campaign does a really good job of combining all those iconic abilities and weapons to make sure it doesn't feel clunky or confusing. At all times, you've got the Predator's wrist blades equipped, but you can also easily swap through the 4 primary weapons: the Plasma Caster, the Throwing Disc, the Explosive Mines, and the Spear, with those first 2 sharing the same energy bar. And when you got all of these abilities unlocked is when this campaign is at its absolute best, where you're more or less like an interstellar, murderous version of Batman, stalking these unfortunate Marines from the high ground and taking them out one by one, collecting their skulls like they're trading cards. You can swap through vision modes to make it easier to track enemies, lure Marines away from the pack, leap tall buildings in a single bound, and really just be as creative as you want here in taking these guys out.
Round about here. Sounded like
The Plasma Caster burns through energy like nobody's business, but it does pretty much vaporize whatever it hits. And once you get the disc and the spear, the whole campaign is utterly broken, as both of these weapons can one-shot most enemies. If the whole campaign had just been taken on Marines like this, it probably would have been awesome. But this thing is so close to being great that it hurts, because it's ruined by one of the crappiest melee combat mechanics ever, which you're all but forced into when taken on the Xenos. Right, so for the wrist blades, you've got a light and a heavy attack, along with blocking. And you can kind of look at this as if it's like rock, paper, scissors, in the sense that a light attack interrupts a heavy attack interrupts a block, and a block can prevent taking damage from a light attack. Sense? And while that may sound good on paper, it seldom works in practice, and it all kind of goes to shit when you're fighting anything more than a single enemy, because it becomes really tricky to visually read what inputs you're even supposed to be countering. There's these really awesome executions where you can finish off the Xenos in these really elaborate ways, like giving them the backbreaker, snapping them over your knee like you're the Iron Sheik. But these are often pointless, not to mention dangerous, because if another Xeno is still left alive, well then they're going to start taking chunks out of you from the side while you're stuck in this unskippable animation. Because the whole thing's played from a first-person perspective, a perspective not known for giving the player total situational awareness, it is likely that this will happen quite a lot. Thankfully though, once you get the disc and the spear, you won't have to bother with the melee combat quite as much, which is a good thing because it really just is kind of awful. Just kind of feels like they gave up on it from a development point of view as well, because for the final fight against the Predalien, by the way, they just give you recharging energy for all your weapons, which is far easier than trying to take this thing head on. So, like the Marine campaign, I'd say this one sits somewhere in between the first and the second game. And then the final campaign is for the Alien, which is yet again the shortest of the bunch, and this one in particular might be the shortest campaign in the entire series. The Marine and the Predator campaign will take maybe 2 or so hours to get through, but this one will take you the better part of an hour. And the reason for that is because outside of some very specific moments, you never have to kill anyone to proceed, and can just run right past most enemies entirely.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
You're playing as a Xeno referred to as Number 6, not to be confused with the Sinister Six from Marvel Comics, or Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue. And they gloss over the life cycle completely this time, kicking off with Six inside a lab getting tested on by Weyland-Yutani. After the pyramid is opened, it causes a power surge which releases Six from its confines, and like all good Xenos, it doesn't waste time in making as many head and chest cavities as possible, running amok and violently murdering anything in its path. Like the other games in the series, taking a more subtle approach is better than trying to run in the front door, and what I actually really like here is the way this campaign has updated those stealth mechanics, giving the alien this heightened vision which pretty much lets it see in the light and shadows at all times. Along with being able to distract NPCs, use the darkness to actually hide yourself, and even knock out nearby light sources, it really helps to make it feel like an actual stealth game.
This is interesting. A new stratagem.
Sneaking up behind and killing NPCs again shows off those really impressive and gruesome takedowns, and the look of absolute fear in the eyes of your victims moments before they catch your spiked tail with their face is pretty awesome. I mean, even those combat synthetics, which more or less look like nightmare machines, show fear in their face moments before they get put out of commission. The thing is though, like I said, there's not really ever any good reason to spend all that extra time killing every single NPC, unless you just really like killing things. And most of the areas can be blazed through in a few minutes. To put it into perspective, the speedrun record for the Marine campaign is around 50 minutes. The speedrun for the Alien campaign is around 11. Shit. This campaign also has the absolute worst final boss fight in the whole game, where you need to take on 3 Predators back to back, and this just proves again how the melee combat is one of the worst things ever made by another human being. Even just the idea of a lone Xeno being able to defeat an elder Predator in hand-to-hand combat, or I guess claw-to-claw combat, is just fucking insulting, and almost as offensive to witness as it was in that first AVP movie, where one Xeno took down 2 separate Predators.
Bullshit!
Like the endings for the other characters, this one has the alien being transported to the Xeno homeworld, and it's kind of sad that Rebellion never made a sequel to this, or got to showcase what they would have envisioned that planet looking like. AVP 2010 did ultimately sell quite well for the time, but it didn't get the best response from gamers or critics, and although it had quite an active multiplayer scene, that's all but dead now. A big part of that, I think, was the insane expectations that gamers had back in 2010, when the industry was really at one of its all-time highs. You've got to remember that this was around the time that we had games like Mass Effect 2, Red Dead Redemption, Fallout New Vegas, and Arkham Asylum, among a whole heap of others. We were unknowingly enjoying some of the best titles the industry would ever produce, so for something to be anything other than an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10 experience was instantly frowned upon. A game like this, which really was just a better looking and playing version of the same game they made back in 1999, didn't get the best reviews or response from critics or fans. It's a hard 7, just like your mum.
I like this one.
Either way though, AVP 2010 is often regarded as one of the weaker games in the series, and it's really the last entry in the franchise that we've ever had, which is probably the most depressing thing to think about. There was a mobile game that came out in 2013, which I've actually read good things about, but that's still over a decade since anyone took another shot at the title. Both of these franchises live on though, with the release of things like Predator Hunting Grounds, along with Aliens Fireteam and the upcoming Aliens Descent. Yeah, another RTS. I doubt people have also forgotten about Aliens Colonial Marines either, and I still hold out hope that someday we'll get a proper remaster for Alien Trilogy in Alien Resurrection. So there's still life left in this franchise without a doubt, and as we're living in the age of remakes and sequels, it's really only got to be a matter of time until someone else has a go at it.
Come on, Harrison, give it up, man.
But as it is, the AVP series offers up a really cool little collection of games, which serve as like a mini catalogue of how gaming has progressed over the years. It's still funny to think that despite how many generations these games have crossed through, they're still united by one thing: scaring you shitless. They say that in space no one can hear you scream, but play through some of these games and your neighbours are definitely likely to.